Hi everybody and welcome back. My name is Moses Sparks. I am a professional wildlife photographer and I do that work all over the world. I'm here for Samy's camera and today we're going to talk about the lenses in the Sony lineup that you can use for wildlife and nature photography. And we're coming to you live from the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Refuge in beautiful Van Nuys, California. So we'll start with the big dog first. This is the 600mm f4 G Master. This is currently the longest lens in the Sony lineup. And if you shoot small birds, distant animals, anything like that, you just cannot find a better tool than this. And if you're someone that has ever used a 600mm lens from any manufacturer in the DSLR era, you will be absolutely astonished when you pick this one up because it literally just feels weightless. And it's not only lightweight, it's perfectly balanced. So shooting handheld with it is absolutely possible. And absolutely possible to carry it all day, wherever you need to go. Fantastic piece of equipment. The next lens down here is the 400mm F2.8 G Master. And this guy here is my personal choice. This is the lens that I travel with all over the world. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the places that I find myself working a lot is the jungle, the rainforest, deep woods, shooting owls and things like that. And in those environments, this f2.8 aperture, it's just absolutely magic. Instead of being forced to shoot at very, very high ISOs that are going to degrade your image quality, shooting wide open with this lens lets you keep those to a manageable level and still have a fast enough shutter speed to freeze action for things like flying birds, small animals that jump around, never stay still. Just like the 600, this lens is extremely lightweight, the lightest one of its kind, and perfectly balanced. The balance is achieved because Sony moved the majority of the optical elements to the rear of the lens instead of in the middle or toward the front. And what that means is it just feels right. It's not front heavy, it's not back heavy. It just sits right in your hands, lets you hold it steady and get sharp pictures. I love this thing. Next up in the lineup here is the 200 to 600 G lens. Maximum aperture on this lens at 200mm is f5.6, and it moves down a third of a stop at the long end, 600mm, to 6.3. Still decently fast. And it's worth pointing out, this lens is all internal zoom. You'll notice that when you zoom it, it never changes size. That is really beneficial for a number of reasons. First of all, on a tripod, you don't have the lens zooming in and out, so the balance never changes, right? It's the same thing for hand holding it. The balance never changes. Once you've got your hands where you want them, you can zoom in or out and everything stays the same. The other thing that's super nice about this is weather sealing on this lens is very good because nothing's moving in or out, it's all sealed. So rain and dust getting into the lens, much less of an issue. And the zoom throw on this lens, super short. That's it. From 200 to 600mm. Takes about a quarter of a turn. So it's really just a joy to work with. This lens really kicked open the doors for a lot of folks that wanted serious telephoto reach for wildlife, but just are not able to invest in a big prime like these guys. All right, next up, this is the 100 to 400 G Master. And this lens, this is the first Sony Super Telephoto that I purchased, and I still love this thing. It's just, if you were gonna have one lens to go out and do nature and wildlife photography, be hard to do better than this guy. It's small and compact. It's the same size as a 70 to 200 without the hood, even smaller, right? And it achieves that because this one does extend as it zooms. This is 400 millimeters, but the beauty of it is you can get it down to this small size for packing and traveling. And if you're pressed for space, if you're doing something like getting on a bush plane in Africa with a 33-pound weight limit for clothes and camera equipment, something like this guy can really be a lifesaver because it's just so small and so lightweight. And the optical quality on this thing is fantastic. The other thing that's fantastic about it is minimum focus distance. It's just over 3 feet. That means this makes a really serviceable macro lens. So it's super versatile. Next one I got here, this is the 70 to 200 F2.8 G Master version 2. And what Sony has done with all of the G Master zooms in the version 2, they're smaller and they're significantly lighter than the version 1 lenses were, and they're much better optically. One of the things that people talk about a lot is corner-to-corner sharpness is significantly improved. So if you're somebody that shoots landscapes, architecture, products, all kinds of things, where you don't just need the center of the image sharp, but you want it sharp right out to the corners, these lenses really perform. This is my number 2 lens when I travel, along with the 400. This guy, when things get in close, this is just invaluable because being able to zoom back to 70 millimeter, and the closer that subjects get to you, moving subjects, animals, birds, things like that, a zoom lens is going to be a lot more useful there. This is for reach, right? But this is to be able to change your framing as things get in close to you. And it just does a fantastic job of it. Just like the 100 to 400, this lens focuses very close, even closer than this one. So the magnification is fantastic. It makes a really excellent macro lens, especially when you combine it with the Sony Teleconverters, which all of these lenses take. Okay, getting shorter now. This is the 90 f2.8 macro. And if you're a person that likes to shoot tiny little subjects, you want to explore things like insects, flowers, and little stuff like that, this is your tool. This lets you achieve 1-to-1 ratio of imagery production. And what that means is if you're photographing something like a butterfly, you can actually get the image on the sensor the same size as the real object. That's what the magnification ratio is about. Fantastic lens. All right, then we get into the shorter lenses here. And these lenses are going to be more geared to people that want to do landscapes and scenics and things like that. So the Swiss Army knife here, 24 to 70, G Master, f2.8 version 2. Again, much smaller and lighter than version 1 and much improved optically. Everything about it is just better. Autofocus is much faster. It's just sharper. Everything about it just works better. Then going wider still, this is the 16 to 35 G Master f2.8 and also version 2. You know the story. Smaller, lighter, focuses faster, optically better all the way around. Fantastic lens. This is sort of a bread and butter lens for landscape people. So I've got one more lens here that I want to talk about, and this little guy is my new number 3 lens when I travel. Those 3 being 400 2.8, 70 to 200 2.8, and this little guy is the new 20 to 70 f4 G lens. And I love this thing. It is so small and so lightweight, takes up no room in a bag, but the focal length range on this, to me, is just ideal, right? Because as much as I love the 16 to 35, 35, you know, topping out in your reach at 35 millimeter, that's going to leave a big gap for me between this lens and a 70 to 200. This guy going out to 70 millimeter, there's no gap at all. And for me, 20 millimeter has always been the most versatile single focal length in a wide angle. It just works. It's wide enough to capture almost anything you want, but it's not too wide where you're going to be dealing with distortion. So that is a fantastic new tool. And I know that for some people, it comes down to a decision, 24 to 70 or the 20 to 70. The advantage here, of course, is you've got an extra stop of light at f2.8. The advantage here is you've got a smaller, lighter, easier to pack lens. And for landscape stuff, the f4, not a disadvantage at all, because you're going to be stopping that lens down, probably f8, f11, somewhere in there. One more thing to talk about here, and that is the Sony teleconverters. And I have here the 1.4 and the 2x teleconverters. And these things are such useful tools, but they're also widely misunderstood, I find, in terms of what they're good for and what they're not so good for. So a question that I get asked constantly in workshops and in online forums is, can I use a teleconverter with my Sony zoom lens? I've got a 200 to 600 and I want even more reach. Can I use a teleconverter with that lens? Well, the answer is yes. It will fit and it will function, but in my opinion and in my experience, it is not ideal. And the reason is you've already got a relatively slow lens at f6.3. And by slow, I'm talking about light transmission, how much light the aperture lets in. So 6.3, that's not terrible, but no one would call that a fast lens. So if I put a 1.4 teleconverter on it, then yes, I extend the range, but I also lose a stop of light. If I put a 2x teleconverter on it, now I lose 2 stops of light. I take that 600 millimeter long end out to 1200 millimeter, but now the lens is so slow that unless the light is really, really bright, and in most cases really, really bright means not really, really good, that's probably high noon, and that's not ideal light to shoot in. And in low light, in a lot of the scenarios where the light and the environment is just going to look better, it's going to yield better photographs. Using this on here is going to put you at a real disadvantage. It's also going to slow down your autofocus. And for wildlife, that's something you don't want to do. So what are they good for? So teleconverters, the better the lens that you're attaching it to, the better the performance you're going to get from a teleconverter. So these guys are really designed to work with big primes like the 400 and the 600, because this lens is fast enough already in terms of light transmission. Losing a stop on an f2.8 lens, that's not a big deal in a lot of cases. And this is going to give me a 40% increase in focal length, right? This guy is going to cost me 2 stops of light, taking this lens down to f5.6, but it's going to double the focal length and get me out to 800 millimeters. So I think in general, and there are no hard and fast rules, right? Because every situation is different. The way you work may not be how other people work. So you have to decide for yourself. But in general, these are much better, going to yield much better results paired up with the big prime lenses. Okay, so there's one last lens to talk about, and we don't have that lens here today because it's brand new. It's just been announced. Sony has just announced a 300 millimeter f2.8 G Master prime lens. A lot of people have already tested pre-production versions, and the feedback is that that lens is really excellent used with these teleconverters. So now all of a sudden you can buy a 300 2.8, which is half the price of this lens, couple it with a 2x teleconverter, and now you've got a 600 millimeter F5.6 super high quality prime lens. And for a lot of people, that's going to be an entrance into the world of big prime lenses that might not have otherwise been available to them. So I know that a lot of people are looking at it, you know, from that standpoint. That's exciting stuff. That's great news. Okay, so I think that wraps it up. We've talked about all of these lenses. And if you are interested in purchasing or checking out or renting any of these lenses, they are all available at Samy's Camera in their multiple Southern California locations. And they also have people that are knowledgeable about them and can answer all your questions. Thank you. See you in the next video.